In the vast wilderness of Montana, where the Rocky Mountains pierce the sky like ancient spears and the wind carries stories older than memory, lived a 17-year-old Apache named Kai Shadowhawk. His grandfather, Thomas Shadowhawk, had moved their family to this remote reservation decades ago, seeking peace after a lifetime of battles both literal and metaphorical. Kai spent his days helping his grandfather with their small ranch, but his heart yearned for something beyond the endless horizon of grasslands and the weight of expectations that seemed to follow him everywhere. Little did he know that on this particular autumn morning, as golden leaves danced through crisp air, his life was about to change in ways that would challenge everything he believed about fate, family, and the mysterious connections that bind all living things together. The first hook came as Kai walked along Bitter Creek, the stream that wound through their property like a silver ribbon. Something glinted in his peripheral vision, and when he turned, he saw a magnificent bald eagle struggling on the rocky shore. The bird's left wing hung at an unnatural angle, and blood matted its pristine white head feathers. Most teenagers might have called for help or simply walked away, but Kai had been raised with the old teachings. His grandfather had always said that when nature presents you with a choice, you don't hesitate. You act with respect and purpose. As he approached the injured raptor, its piercing yellow eyes locked onto his, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, boy and bird regarded each other with mutual recognition of something deeper than species, something that transcended the ordinary world of ranches and reservations. Kai's hands trembled as he carefully wrapped the eagle in his jacket, feeling the powerful heartbeat against his chest. The bird, which should have fought him with razor-sharp talons and beak, remained surprisingly calm, as if it understood his intentions. During the 3-mile walk back to the ranch house, Kai found himself talking to the creature, sharing thoughts he had never spoken aloud. He told the eagle about his dreams of leaving Montana, about his acceptance letter to Colorado State University that he had hidden from his grandfather, about his fear that pursuing his own path meant abandoning everything his ancestors had fought to preserve. The eagle listened with an intensity that made Kai wonder if animals truly understood more than humans gave them credit for. By the time they reached home, something had shifted in the dynamic between them, something that felt ancient and significant. Thomas Shadowhawk looked up from mending fence wire as his grandson approached with the injured bird. The old man's weathered face showed no surprise, only a knowing nod that made Kai feel like this moment had been written in the stars long before either of them was born. Together, they cleaned the eagle's wounds with the gentleness of surgeons, using traditional healing herbs alongside modern first aid supplies. Thomas's hands, gnarled from decades of ranch work, moved with surprising delicacy as he set the broken wing using techniques passed down through generations of Apache healers. Throughout the process, the eagle remained remarkably cooperative, its intelligent eyes following their every movement. Thomas murmured prayers in their ancestral language, words that seemed to resonate through the small ranch house like a song only the three of them could hear. As evening approached, they built a temporary shelter in the barn, complete with perches and fresh water, hoping against hope that the magnificent bird would survive the night. For 3 days, Kai tended to the eagle with the devotion of a monk caring for sacred relics. He brought fresh fish from Bitter Creek, changed the bandages twice daily, and spent hours sitting quietly nearby, reading aloud from his favorite books. The eagle, which he had named Swift Cloud after a half-remembered story from his childhood, seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. Its appetite returned, and the alertness in its golden eyes suggested a quick recovery. Thomas watched his grandson's dedication with growing pride and concern. He recognized something in Kai's manner, a sense of purpose that had been missing for months. On the third evening, as purple shadows stretched across the Montana landscape, Thomas pulled his grandson aside for a conversation that would prove more prophetic than either of them imagined. He spoke of signs and symbols, of the way nature sometimes sends messengers when people need guidance most. His words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, hinting at possibilities that existed just beyond the realm of ordinary understanding. The second hook came on the morning of the 4th day, when Kai entered the barn to find Swift Cloud's makeshift enclosure empty. The door remained securely latched, and there were no signs of struggle or forced escape. It was as if the eagle had simply vanished into the morning mist. Kai's heart sank with disappointment and worry. Had Swiftcloud's injuries been more severe than they appeared? Had some predator found its way into the barn during the night? He searched the entire property, calling the bird's name until his voice grew hoarse, but found no trace of his feathered patient. Thomas tried to comfort his grandson, explaining that wild creatures often leave without ceremony when their time for healing has ended. But Kai felt a profound sense of loss that surprised him with its intensity. He had grown attached to the magnificent bird in ways he hadn't fully understood until this moment of absence. The empty barn felt cavernous, filled with echoes of what might have been. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the Shadowhawk Ranch. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a wildlife biologist from the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks, drove up their dusty driveway in a government pickup truck loaded with research equipment. She introduced herself with professional courtesy, explaining that she was tracking a particular bald eagle that had been fitted with a GPS monitoring device as part of a long-term migration study. The bird, designated as Eagle 47 in their database, had shown unusual movement patterns over the past several days, spending significant time in their area before suddenly disappearing from their tracking system. Dr. Martinez showed them satellite images and data printouts, her excitement barely contained as she described the significance of her research. What she didn't tell them, what she couldn't have known at that moment, was that Eagle 47's tracking device had recorded something impossible, something that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of her scientific training. Kai listened to Dr. Martinez's explanation with growing unease. The timing of Eagle 47's presence in their area corresponded exactly with his care of Swiftcloud, but he hesitated to mention the injured bird he had helped. Something about the scientist's clinical approach to wildlife made him protective of his experience with the eagle. Instead, he offered to show her around the property, hoping to learn more about what had drawn the tracked bird to their land. As they walked along Bitter Creek, Dr. Martinez collected water samples and soil specimens, muttering about mineral content and prey availability. Her scientific instruments beeped and clicked constantly, quantifying every aspect of the environment. Yet for all her sophisticated equipment, she seemed to miss the subtle signs that Kai's grandfather had taught him to recognize. The way certain trees grew differently near water, the patterns in animal tracks that spoke of territorial boundaries, the almost imperceptible changes in air pressure that preceded weather shifts. The mystery deepened when Dr. Martinez revealed the most puzzling aspect of Eagle 47's behavior. According to her GPS data, the bird had made several trips to a specific location roughly 10 miles northeast of the Shadowhawk Ranch, always returning to the same coordinates within a few meters. The location appeared to be uninhabited wilderness, far from any known eagle nesting sites or feeding areas. She had planned to investigate the site herself but had been delayed by bureaucratic complications regarding land access permits. The area in question straddled the boundary between the reservation and adjacent national forest land, creating jurisdictional challenges that could take weeks to resolve. Her frustration was evident as she described the limitations imposed by governmental red tape, especially when dealing with time-sensitive research. She asked if Kai and his grandfather knew anything about the location, showing them topographical maps marked with precise coordinates. Thomas studied the maps with the careful attention of someone who had spent 70 years learning the landscape. His finger traced elevation lines and waterways, and his expression grew thoughtful. He recognized the area as part of what his own grandfather had called the Eagle's Rest, a remote valley that supposedly held special significance in Apache tradition. According to family stories, warriors had once sought visions there during times of great decision. Thomas had visited the place only once, as a young man preparing for military service in Vietnam, and he remembered it as a location where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds seemed thinner than elsewhere. He shared these details with Dr. Martinez, who listened with the polite attention of someone trained to respect indigenous knowledge while maintaining scientific skepticism. However, her interest clearly piqued when he mentioned the presence of unusual rock formations that might provide ideal eagle roosting sites. That evening, as Dr. Martinez departed with promises to return once her permits were approved, Kai found himself unable to sleep. The coincidence of Swiftcloud's disappearance and Eagle 47's mysterious behavior felt too significant to ignore. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the Montana night. Coyotes calling across the plains, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant lowing of cattle. But underneath these comfortable sounds, he sensed something else, a kind of expectant silence that made his skin prickle with anticipation. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and walked out onto the front porch, where the star-filled sky stretched endlessly overhead. The Milky Way painted a broad stroke of light across the darkness, and for a moment, Kai felt the profound loneliness that comes with contemplating the vastness of the universe. Then, just as he was about to return inside, he heard it. The unmistakable cry of a bald eagle, coming from the direction of Eagle's Rest. The next morning brought a decision that would change everything. Despite his grandfather's concerns about hiking alone to such a remote location, Kai packed supplies for a day trip to investigate the mysterious coordinates. Thomas's worry was understandable. The terrain was challenging, with steep ravines and unpredictable weather patterns that could turn dangerous without warning. But something in Kai's determination reminded the old man of his younger self, and he ultimately agreed to the expedition on the condition that Kai carry emergency supplies and check in by radio every 2 hours. As Kai loaded his backpack with water, food, first aid supplies, and his grandfather's old military compass, Thomas pressed a small leather pouch into his hands. Inside was a piece of turquoise carved with symbols that predated written language, a family talisman that had been carried by Shadowhawk men for more generations than anyone could count. Thomas explained that the stone had always brought his family members safely home from dangerous journeys, and that Kai might need its protection more than either of them currently understood. The hike to Eagle's Rest proved more challenging than Kai had anticipated. The terrain alternated between dense pine forests and open meadows dotted with granite outcroppings, each presenting its own navigational difficulties. His GPS device struggled with reception in the deeper valleys, forcing him to rely on traditional landmarks and his grandfather's hand-drawn maps. By mid-morning, his legs ached from climbing steep grades, and his water supply was lower than he had planned. Yet something drove him forward, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere curiosity about Dr. Martinez's research. The closer he got to the coordinates, the more convinced he became that Swift Cloud was somehow connected to this journey. Birds called from hidden perches in the forest canopy, but none were the eagle he hoped to find. Still, their varied songs seemed to form a kind of musical pathway, drawing him deeper into the wilderness. When Kai finally reached the valley that matched Dr. Martinez's coordinates, he understood immediately why his great-grandfather had called it Eagle's Rest. The landscape opened into a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering stone walls carved with ancient petroglyphs. A clear spring bubbled up from the valley floor, creating a small pool that reflected the sky like a mirror. The entire area radiated a sense of timeless peace that made him instinctively lower his voice, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something sacred. Massive pine trees grew in perfect symmetry around the edges of the valley, their branches forming natural perches at various heights. It was, without question, an ideal habitat for eagles, but it was also something more. A place where the natural world seemed to exist in perfect balance, untouched by the complications of modern life. Kai set down his backpack and simply stood in wonder, feeling like he had discovered a secret that the mountains had been keeping for centuries. The first sign that he was not alone came as a shadow passing overhead. Kai looked up to see Swift Cloud circling the valley in lazy spirals, apparently completely healed from his injuries. The eagle's flight was strong and confident, showing no trace of the broken wing that had brought them together just days before. Relief flooded through Kai, followed quickly by wonder at the bird's apparent ability to navigate to this remote location despite its recent trauma. He called out Swift Cloud's name, and the eagle responded with a piercing cry that echoed off the stone walls like a natural fanfare. For several minutes, boy and bird acknowledged each other across the species divide, sharing a moment of recognition that needed no words. Then Swift Cloud disappeared beyond the rim of the valley, leaving Kai alone with questions that multiplied rather than diminished. As Kai explored the valley floor, he began to notice details that his initial wonder had obscured. The petroglyphs carved into the stone walls were not random decorations, but seemed to tell a specific story involving eagles, human figures, and symbols he couldn't decipher. Near the spring, he found evidence of recent human activity. Footprints in the soft earth, the remains of a small fire, and most intriguingly, several objects that clearly didn't belong in this natural setting. There was an expensive-looking compass, its brass surface tarnished but still functional. A leather journal wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. And most puzzling of all, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, the kind used by serious wildlife photographers. The camera's memory card was still inside, and when Kai turned on the device, he found hundreds of images of eagles in flight, feeding, and interacting with their environment. The timestamps showed that the photos had been taken over several weeks, with the most recent dated just 2 days ago. The journal proved even more intriguing than the camera. Written in careful handwriting, it documented systematic observations of eagle behavior in the valley, complete with detailed sketches and behavioral notes. The author, who signed entries only with the initials RM, had apparently been conducting unauthorized research in the area for several months. The entries described specific eagles by their physical characteristics, noting their daily routines, feeding patterns, and social interactions. Most fascinating were the observations about what RM called unusual behavioral adaptations among the eagles, including problem-solving abilities that seemed to exceed normal raptor intelligence. The final entry, dated 3 days ago, was incomplete, ending mid-sentence with what appeared to be hastily scrawled words. Subject approaching unprecedented behavior must document. They seemed to understand. Below this, the handwriting became illegible, as if the writer had been interrupted or forced to leave suddenly. Kai's investigation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps echoing off the valley walls. He quickly gathered the camera and journal, unsure whether their owner was returning or if he was about to encounter someone else entirely. A figure emerged from the tree line on the far side of the valley. A woman in her 50s, wearing professional hiking gear and carrying a large backpack loaded with scientific equipment. She spotted Kai immediately and approached with the confident stride of someone comfortable in wilderness settings. As she drew closer, he recognized her as Dr. Rebecca Matthews, a renowned ornithologist whose research papers he had read during his own interest in wildlife biology. Her reputation in the scientific community was formidable, but her presence here raised questions about the territorial restrictions that had supposedly prevented Dr. Martinez from accessing the area. Why was Dr. Matthews able to conduct research where government employees could not? Dr. Matthews greeted Kai with professional courtesy tinged with obvious curiosity about his presence in such a remote location. She introduced herself and explained that she was conducting independent research on eagle intelligence and behavior patterns, funded by a private foundation that specialized in avian cognition studies. Her work, she claimed, had been approved through different channels than Dr. Martinez's government research, allowing her greater flexibility in accessing restricted areas. However, as she spoke, Kai noticed inconsistencies in her story. Her equipment was far more sophisticated than typical field research would require, including devices that looked more like surveillance gear than scientific instruments. Additionally, her casual mention of months of observation contradicted her claim of recent permit approval. When Kai mentioned finding her journal and camera, her expression shifted from friendliness to something harder to read, a mixture of relief and concern that suggested there was more to her presence than pure scientific curiosity. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Matthews asked Kai directly about his relationship with the eagles in the valley. She seemed to know that he had cared for an injured bird, despite the fact that he had mentioned nothing about Swiftcloud. Her questions became increasingly specific, focusing on the bird's behavior during recovery and any unusual characteristics he might have observed. When Kai asked how she knew about his rescue of the eagle, Dr. Matthews hesitated before explaining that she had been monitoring the valley's eagle population for months and had observed what appeared to be an injured bird being removed from the area. Her story made sense on the surface, but Kai's instincts, sharpened by years of living in wilderness areas, told him that he was not receiving complete truth. The doctor's eyes held an intensity that went beyond academic interest, and her questions seemed designed to extract information rather than share knowledge. The mystery deepened when Swiftcloud returned to the valley, landing on a dead tree branch not 50 feet from where Kai and Dr. Matthews stood. The eagle's arrival seemed to galvanize the scientist, who immediately began photographing the bird with equipment that included not just cameras but what appeared to be measurement devices and recording equipment. SwiftCloud showed no fear of the human activity, instead displaying behavior that was indeed unusual for a wild raptor. The bird seemed to be deliberately posing for the photographs, turning its head to display different angles and remaining motionless for extended periods. Most remarkably, it appeared to be watching Dr. Matthews with the same intense attention she was directing toward it, as if bird and researcher were engaged in some form of communication that Kai couldn't understand. The entire interaction felt choreographed, like a performance that had been rehearsed over time. Dr. Matthews' excitement was palpable as she documented SwiftCloud's behavior. She muttered technical terminology under her breath, referring to enhanced cognitive function and unprecedented social adaptation while operating her various devices. When Kai asked about the purpose of her measurements, she explained that she was studying the effects of environmental factors on avian intelligence, particularly in species that showed signs of accelerated learning. Her research, she claimed, suggested that certain locations might produce evolutionary pressures that enhanced cognitive development in bird populations. The valley, with its unique geological characteristics and isolation from human disturbance, provided an ideal laboratory for observing these phenomena. Yet as she spoke, Kai noticed that her attention kept drifting to something beyond simple behavioral observation. She seemed to be looking for something specific, waiting for SwiftCloud to demonstrate a particular behavior or ability. The revelation came when Dr. Matthews asked Kai to step back while she conducted what she called a response test with SwiftCloud. She placed a small, shiny object on the ground between herself and the eagle, then retreated to a distance of about 20 feet. SwiftCloud immediately flew down from its perch and approached the object, but instead of simply investigating it, the bird performed an elaborate series of movements that looked almost ritualistic. It circled the object 3 times, touched it briefly with its beak, then flew directly to Dr. Matthews and dropped something at her feet before returning to collect the original item. The entire sequence took less than 2 minutes, but it displayed problem-solving abilities and intentional communication that Kai had never seen in wild birds. Dr. Matthews was clearly delighted with the performance, carefully collecting and examining whatever SwiftCloud had delivered to her. What the eagle had brought her was another piece of the puzzle that was becoming increasingly complex and disturbing. The object was a small metal band, similar to those used by wildlife researchers to track bird populations. But this one bore markings that Kai didn't recognize. Dr. Matthews examined the band with a magnifying glass, comparing it to notes in a different journal than the one Kai had found earlier. Her excitement was obvious, but when Kai asked about the significance of the band, her explanation was vague and unsatisfying. She claimed it was part of a tracking system used by previous researchers, but her reluctance to provide details made Kai increasingly suspicious. The entire interaction felt staged, as if Dr. Matthews and SwiftCloud had performed this exchange many times before. The implications of such a relationship between researcher and subject raised questions about the nature of her work and the true purpose of her presence in Eagle's Rest. The situation became even more complicated when additional eagles began arriving in the valley. Over the course of 30 minutes, 5 more birds appeared, each displaying the same unusual lack of fear toward human presence that SwiftCloud had shown. Dr. Matthews seemed to recognize each individual bird, greeting them by names that suggested long familiarity. The eagles arranged themselves on various perches around the valley in what appeared to be deliberate formation, creating a natural amphitheater with Dr. Matthews and Kai at the center. The behavior was so unprecedented that Kai found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. These birds were acting more like trained animals than wild creatures, yet there was an intelligence in their actions that went beyond simple conditioning. They seemed to be making decisions based on complex reasoning rather than responding to basic stimuli. Dr. Matthews' demeanor changed completely as the eagles settled into position. The friendly scientist facade disappeared, replaced by someone clearly in command of an unusual situation. She explained to Kai that he had stumbled into the middle of a research project that went far beyond conventional ornithology. The eagles of Eagle's Rest, she revealed, represented an evolutionary leap that had occurred over several generations of isolation in the valley's unique environment. Environmental factors, including mineral content in the water source and electromagnetic properties of the surrounding stone formations, had apparently accelerated cognitive development in the local eagle population. The result was a group of birds with problem-solving abilities, memory retention, and communication skills that approached those of higher primates. Dr. Matthews claimed that her research was funded by organizations interested in understanding the mechanisms behind this rapid evolutionary change. However, as Dr. Matthews continued her explanation, Kai began to understand that the situation was far more serious than academic research. The eagles were not just subjects of study but active participants in what amounted to intelligence gathering. Their enhanced cognitive abilities allowed them to serve as surveillance agents, observing and reporting on human activities across vast territories. The metal bands they carried contained miniaturized recording and transmission equipment that allowed them to document conversations, photograph documents, and relay information back to Dr. Matthews' organization. Swiftcloud's injury had been genuine, but his rescue had also provided an opportunity to observe Kai and his grandfather, gathering information about their activities and loyalties. The revelation hit Kai like a physical blow, transforming his rescue of an injured animal into something far more sinister. The full scope of the conspiracy became clear when Dr. Matthews revealed that the enhanced eagles were part of a network that extended far beyond Eagle's Rest. Similar populations had been identified in remote locations across the American West, each serving as intelligence-gathering nodes for organizations that operated outside traditional governmental oversight. The eagle's natural migration patterns and hunting behaviors provided perfect cover for surveillance activities, allowing them to monitor everything from military installations to private ranches without arousing suspicion. Dr. Matthews' organization, which she identified only as a private research consortium, had spent years developing techniques for enhancing and directing the bird's natural abilities. The project represented a new frontier in intelligence gathering, one that exploited the boundary between natural and artificial enhancement to create agents that were virtually undetectable. Kai realized that his presence in the valley had not been accidental. Swiftcloud's injury and subsequent rescue had been orchestrated to bring him to this moment, though he couldn't yet understand why he specifically had been targeted. Dr. Matthews seemed to be evaluating him for something, watching his reactions to her revelations with the same intensity she had directed toward the eagles. When he asked directly about her intentions, she explained that his combination of technical aptitude, wilderness skills, and family connections to the local area made him an ideal candidate for recruitment into their organization. The fact that he was planning to leave for college in Colorado was actually an advantage, as it would provide cover for his involvement in activities that extended beyond Montana. She offered him what she called a unique opportunity to participate in work that would supposedly serve national security interests while providing him with financial resources far beyond anything a conventional career could offer. The choice Dr. Matthews presented was not really a choice at all. She made it clear that Kai's knowledge of the eagle's enhanced abilities and the existence of their surveillance network meant that he could not simply walk away and pretend the encounter had never happened. His options were to join their organization as a willing participant or to be eliminated as a security risk. The casual way she discussed these alternatives, combined with the presence of the eagles arranged around the valley like sentries, made it clear that she was not making idle threats. Kai found himself in a situation where his rescue of an injured animal had led him into a web of conspiracy that threatened not just his own life but potentially his grandfather's safety as well. The eagles that had seemed like magnificent symbols of wild freedom were revealed as sophisticated tools of surveillance and control. The final revelation came when Dr. Matthews showed Kai the true purpose of Swiftcloud's return to Eagle's Rest. The eagle had not simply come back to thank him for his care, as he had romantically imagined, but to deliver a message that would force his hand. Hidden in a specially designed compartment on Swiftcloud's leg band was a series of photographs and documents that proved his grandfather's connection to activities that would interest Dr. Matthews' organization. Thomas Shadowhawk's military service in Vietnam had involved intelligence work that apparently continued after his official discharge. The old man's ranch served as a way station for individuals and information moving through networks that Dr. Matthews' consortium needed to monitor and potentially control. Kai's recruitment was not just about his own abilities but about gaining access to his grandfather's contacts and operations. The weight of these revelations crushed Kai's remaining illusions about the simplicity of his life on the Montana ranch. Everything he had believed about his family, his choices, and his relationship with the natural world had been built on foundations that were far more complex than he had imagined. Dr. Matthews gave him 24 hours to make his decision about joining their organization, explaining that SwiftCloud would return the next day to collect his answer. If he agreed to cooperate, he would begin training immediately and would be provided with resources to continue his education while serving their interests. If he refused, both he and his grandfather would be eliminated as security risks, their deaths arranged to look like accidents common in wilderness areas. The Eagles would disperse to other territories, and Eagle's Rest would return to being just another remote valley in the Montana wilderness. As Dr. Matthews and the Eagles departed, leaving Kai alone in the valley with his impossible choice, he understood that his childhood had ended not gradually but in a single moment of revelation. The journey back to the ranch felt endless, his mind cycling through possibilities that all seemed to lead to betrayal of either his family or his principles. The turquoise talisman his grandfather had given him seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest, reminding him of generations of Shadowhawk men who had faced difficult choices with courage and wisdom. By the time he reached home, darkness had fallen across the Montana landscape, and he knew that regardless of his decision, nothing would ever be the same. SwiftCloud's return the next day would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one written in languages of deception and compromise that he was only beginning to learn. The story of the young Apache who saved an injured eagle had become something far more complex than anyone could have predicted, transforming from a tale of compassion into a web of surveillance, conspiracy, and impossible choices that would define not just Kai's future, but the safety of everyone he loved.